not born into agriculture. I was actually the first generation of my family that was not born on a farm, on both sides of the family. However, my father was the John Deere guy. He had started out after he left the service. He started out in the parts department, then moved into the service department, and worked his way up through sales, and eventually owned the company. And so I was the parts girl at one point in my life, and John Deere is what clothed me, fed me, and helped make sure that I had a roof over my head. And I've always said that I bleed green and yellow, so it was an easy leap for me to become the Deere milkmaid when I became a dairy farmer. I was going to go off and feed the world, preferably in a war-torn area. I was convinced it was going to be somewhere in the Mideast or in Africa, where famine was just the scourge that we have started to conquer in certain areas. So I left to go to university at Clark University, and I studied comparative foreign policy, international relations, and after a couple semesters there, I realized that what I didn't want to do was, I didn't want to go feed the world. I wanted to feed my corner of it. And I knew that agriculture was where I could do that. I wasn't necessarily going to be standing manure. I wasn't necessarily going to be with cows. But somehow, some way, I could be a part of agriculture and help make sure that people could be fed and fed well. So I came back to Maine to be a part of my dad's business. You know what? I ended up here delivering parts one day, and the rest is sort of like a John Deere fairy tale. My dad actually sold this farm, their very first John Deere, back in 1979. So it was sort of like a circular economy. It's hard to talk about, because as someone who has had really awful jobs that aren't related to dairy farming, my hardest day here is easier than my hardest day anywhere else, because I chose this. And I think that's the difference. And yes, dairy farming is bone-weary sad, bone-weary hard. It is exhausting, and it is consuming, all-consuming. It is not... It's always a cliche. It always seems like we describe dairy farming in cliches. It's a way of life, and it is, but it's the way we make our living, and we're so fortunate to be able to do it, but we've chosen this. We have chosen it, and that is something that so many people don't get to say. They don't get to say, I chose this, and this is what I love doing. So, yes, dairy farmers work extremely hard. They have an amazing work ethic. They are not without flaws, and we need to remember that we aren't the hardest workers on the earth. We just happen to be among the hardest workers. So I like to start with the people that move to the cows. So we have 3 generations of 6 families and 21 family members, and we work with around 35 co-workers to take care of 3,400 cows here on our farm, that are some that were born today and some that are almost 16 or 17 years old. And they get milked 3 times a day. The ones that are in the milking herd will get milked 3 times a day. And our milking herd produces around 17,000 gallons of milk every single day. As a person who has witnessed and seen the changes that occur over time, it's obvious to me and to many dairy farmers that the climate has changed and continues to change, and that, more importantly, it is in crisis. Whether that is something that is a phenomena or it is something that is naturally occurring can be debated by many sectors and many parts of ag over and over again. But for me, it's undeniable that, yes, we are in a climate crisis, and we have seen things change here. Our weather changes and weather patterns seem to be a little more intense and almost dangerous. We are dealing with pressures that we haven't seen before because of these changes that have occurred with our climate, whether it's not being able to rely on a winter to overkill cover crops, or to deal with pests that normally just can't survive the winter, or even just the littlest things in my front garden, the variety of flowers that I can choose, because my zone isn't exactly that that light blue zone anymore. Change isn't necessarily bad. It's whether or not you prepare for it, accept it, and adapt. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that agriculture overall has, is there are changes that are occurring, and if we don't actually look at them, understand them, and make changes to how we do things to adapt to it, it can be disastrous. I think the more important thing is are these changes that are coming, are they all just incidental, or is there something we can do beyond adapting that would mitigate them? If it's going to get warmer here, is it going to get hotter as well? And are we prepared to take care of the people and the animals in a manner that will provide them with comfort and high welfare? Because we're not used to providing that coolness. And is there a way to slow down these changes? Or, for me, I think that we can do things to help slow down these changes and control what we can. And that's an important thing. I think what we have to do is sit down and constructively determine what things we can settle. And we need to really dig in and do that. Actually, we all are, and that's the thing we don't understand in its language. Duke University actually just published a study regarding rural attitudes and climate change and environmental concerns, more or less about conservation. But it's about the language. When you talk to someone in a rural part of the country and you ask them, do you want the land to prosper and do well? Of course they do. Do you want the soil to be healthy? Of course they do. Do you want to protect the waterways? Yes. But if you were to ask them, do you support environmental groups? They would be like, no, because you asked them the wrong question. And they weren't willing to listen to your question better. Same thing goes on if you're asking someone who's more urban. If you're using the wrong language, or the language that they're not familiar with, or that they react to as opposed to connect with, then their response will be almost predictable. So I don't think that the divide is over whether or not people prioritize the health of the earth. I think it's over whether people prioritize the policies. We do too much talking and not enough listening, and a lot of times we don't speak in the same language we're being spoken to. And it's about meeting people where they're at. I have yet to meet a farmer who wants to destroy the quality of their soil. That doesn't mean that some of their practices are the best, but when you talk to them about how to improve their practices, you have to remember that it's just like with a doctor telling a parent, your child has this and you need to do this to change that. A parent is hearing, I'm not doing a good job as a parent and I've hurt my child a lot of times. So we talk about bedside manner, how important it is for doctors. We have to remember that when we're talking with our neighbors or our foes, even if they are our neighbors, we have to have a better bedside manner with them. So, and it's interesting because you brought up lobster fishers, because I know dairy farmers who were dairy farmers on the side. They were lobster fishers during the day. And that day starts when? Before dawn, because they got to get the traps. It's amazing to me that someone could do both of them. And that's a really, really cool insight about them adapting. They literally are on the water. And it doesn't even matter if it's climate change. They can't plan their day. All they can do is prepare for what can happen. And because, yes, they can have an idea what the seas are going to be like, but they don't know whatever can happen. So, and they are. And I would be curious as to whether or not lobster fishers feel that they are on the front lines of climate change, or if they feel that it's just another battle that they're waging, and whether they politically align with it, and because it is a political question sometimes. But there's a lot of time spent in the ag sector denying that it's happening. And it's a shame, because instead of denying it or browbeating someone over the head with the information that says it is, or defending that it isn't, things could be happening. It doesn't matter if you don't believe it's happening. If this is what the forecast says, you have to prepare for it or mitigate for it. And we need to do it. And it's a shame that we have this struggle, and it does exist. I try and surround myself with people who do have this positive look and say we can make changes and we can make them for the good. And the thing is these changes aren't hurting us. They're actually benefiting our soil, they're benefiting our animals, they're benefiting our bottom line. There is a lack of willingness to say, let me read through the Green New Deal proposal and see what I'm already doing and see if I've already covered this basic. Where's that conversation? Instead of flat out denying that it needs to be looked at, flat out rejecting the people who propose it, I'm not saying it's a holy grail. I'm saying, let's look at it and let's tell them and let's share with them. And no, we don't have to educate them with a stick. What we have to do is talk to them and have a conversation and say, you want to do this? Guess what? We're doing it, and we're even going to do it better. You know, when we're talking about sustainability, we eat that for breakfast, you know, and then we save the leftovers for lunch and for supper. You know, regenerative agriculture, it's quite the phrase and movement now, but if you haven't been engaged in regenerative agriculture, then you're not in business anymore. And our farm's been here for over 200 years. There are farms that have only been here for 5 years and they're engaged in regenerative agriculture and they may not even know it, but they're they're great stewards of their land and animals. I don't want them to have to think about dairy every day. I want them to just trust, that they trust. They don't need to know the details, but if they want to know the details, they can call me. I'll gladly give them the details and the truth and the honesty. But I want them to trust. I want them to feel good. I want them to know that their dairy comes from a good place. And I want to make sure that where our dairy comes from continues to be a good place. And I want them to know that when we're looking forward to the goals that we are making for our state, for our communities, for our globe and our universe, dairy is part of the solution. In reality, I just want them to know that I trust them and I appreciate and I am so grateful that they trust us to put our food on their table.